Hey people, Dodger Dave, back in black and red. Hey temple goers, what's that all about? I come with the authorized gospel, or do I? Maybe we've got a shifting mantle of authority going on with the elite-controlled PC science-based religious replacement. So we're going to talk about MK Ultra style mind control, Masonic Mormon mind control, and its use in the entire LDS Brighamite PR machine, including apologetics or your priesthood manual. Don't have one right now though. Okay, so I actually got a large list of items I wanted to discuss relative to this. I've listened to a number of videos, podcasts, and so forth by people, some representing the controlled agenda in and out of the church, which are ultimately still controlled at an apex by the same elite interests for which we have religion in general, and the media, and the educational system, and everything else that programs the behavior and the belief systems of the Goyim. If that sounds a little bit too wild and so forth, just try checking out the information I present. Do your own fact checking. Don't act like a mind control cult victim, and just do the reaction that you're programmed to. Like I don't know, one of my videos on the CES letter, my commentary and so forth, received an apologetic attack, attacking Jeremy Rennell's, etc. And then we go along with the mind control training to say, a couple of his so-called questions, suspicious about the Book of Mormon names, etc., were answered to the satisfaction of many, possibly, through LDS apologetics. Therefore, everything Jeremy says is of the devil. Because we learn that in the Book of Mormon, don't we? All things come from Christ, whom the Egyptian, pharaonic hierarchy invented in the Roman in the Roman ruling family there, and then continued further in our manifest destiny doctrine, where we inherit the red, white, and blue through the Roman-controlled British parent company of some of these privately held municipal corporations. Okay, well, I've introduced a little bit. So basically what we're talking about is that I'm going to point out some of the NLP tactics used, neurolinguistic programming techniques, possibly in where I'm showing that your LDS apologetics, as well as your anti-Mormon new mantle of authority push for the PC gods of science, controlled science through funding, are all for the same ends. And falsehoods in their presentation, or at least, falsehoods and misleading characterizations, etc. So recently, some of the videos I've watched, or at least part of, Emerging Photon, talking about Joseph Smith as his in maternal line is Sephardic Jewish, and aristocratic English through, or possibly English and Scotch, through his father's line, etc. Her views on the assassination of Joseph Smith. Actually, most of what she's talked about there deal with the assassination orchestrated by Brigham Young and so forth. But what I was looking at had to do with a Doctrine and Covenants Central. It's kind of like Book of Mormon Central, another probably LDS businessman funded thing, in support of the LDS Church and presenting a view that basically, the Missourians were prejudiced and threatened, etc., so they murdered Joseph Smith through this mob. Whereas, of course, if you watch enough things, you'll see the ballistics don't match with the church's story. It's pretty obvious that John Taylor and Dr. Richards were the Danite assassins as directed by Brigham Young, head Grand Archie of the Danites. And then also a video by Emerging Photon discussing the Council of 50 and a conspiracy involving people like Wilson Law, William Law, Joseph H. Jackson. She screws up a couple times and says Joseph F. Jackson or Joseph whatever, but I mean, give her a break, right? She does a lot of historical research. She seems to be very pro-Joseph Smith. I'm in agreement with her on the Brigham Young originated assassination and so on and so forth. We've seen, people talking about his Kuhn and Loeb Jewish banking, etc. Of course, Joseph Smith, her lineage stuff is very interesting. Her historical stuff's very interesting. Other than her pro-Joseph Smith bias, almost as a necessary opposite of Brigham Young. Just like we say, well, if you're not Democrat, you're Republican, you're assumed what's presented as the opposite of two agendas, basically all privately owned and controlled and manipulated from an apex above to keep the people in a constant state of being in a frenzy and easily malleable, using Hegelian dialectic tactics. So what she's talking about here in the presentation regarding this conspiracy, it seems like she adds in the violent part about insurrection, or maybe that's inherent in the language, in involvement of people from Carthage, etc., in what was to take place in Nauvoo. Ironically, we also find that the support of the Nauvoo Council and upholding Joseph Smith as mayor and the council in acting in what they call legally authorized destruction of this the press that created the Expositor magazine, or newspaper, I suppose we would call it, which the LDS Apologetics state in the Doctrine and Covenants Central is exaggerating claims. Of course, they don't want to name what those claims are to bring them up in your mind, but Emerging Photon does discuss, or reads in a document there concerning the spiritual wife system, of which Joseph H. Jackson has said a great deal in his signed, certified affidavit concerning Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith as the effectual leaders of the Danites, despite the official mantle being placed on what's his name anyway, and his involvement with the Danites, as Joseph H. Jackson claims to be basically undercover regarding Joseph Smith. Emerging Photon doesn't mention that. She does mention Joseph H. Jackson as a member of the Council of 50, one of very few non-members. In other words, Joseph H. Jackson, though he's mentioned in the Doctrine and Covenants, was not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but claims in the things that I have read from his own material, and I've created videos on those in the past, which discuss the spiritual wife system, which is not part of the approved discussion. It's outside the bounds that the Lord has set, the lords of power within the movement, that allows people like John DeLynn on one side and Kwaku on the other, and other, but they all toe the PC line. Whether it's Ex-Molex, whether it's New Name Noah, whether it's you know, the adorable kids, you know, who went to BYU. Um, Self on the Shelf. I just love those guys. And I think a lot of these young folks possibly could have received some MK mind control. In other words, not their choice. So maybe even some of my rhetoric towards Kwaku is overly judgmental if all of these folks are somewhat doing what they've been programmed to do and possibly otherwise coerced. To always toe the PC line of the new science religion, otherwise you get shadow banned like me and Emerging Photon and others. If you speak outside the bounds that the Lord has set, as I, you know, basically, for those of you who are not familiar with the LDS Temple, language for the corresponding Masonic insignias on your temple garments that I'm not wearing, your magic underwear, the compass, they say, represents, you know, all truth may be circumscribed into one great whole, and we must keep, you know, appetites and so on and so forth within the bounds the Lord has set. Well, the Lords, the elite, set the bounds at which the discussion is on just about everything that they want to control our thoughts on, and whether it's exiting Mormonism, as we have the shifting mantle of authority going from what we call religion and spiritual-based religion and magic world sorts of things to what we call science, whereas ironically, if you do enough research on those whose names are used in science, whether it be Da Vinci, Galileo, Newton, Swedenborg, Kant, Hegel, Darwin, why do we find the esoteric? Why do we find the occult? Why do we find writings from guys like Newton that we get the theory of gravity? Yes, I said theory, because it's used to support things that are mathematically impossible and how we are told the world exists that defy basic geometry. And yes, it is rocket science. So, rocket science is created to confuse you, just like the entire the entire theme that supports. So why do we throw out all of their occult, all their esoteric writings, and then say this is science? Newton said that, you know, hundreds of years of history are just manufactured. He wrote a book on it, right? Do we see that? Do we see his esoteric writings? No, we don't. Do we see his banking writings? You know, we don't talk much about that in his, you know, allegiance to the crown and so on and so forth. No, we just say he discovered gravity when he saw something denser than air fall. Wow. Yeah, he discovered this, what is it, some sort of magnetic tractor beam that goes 360 and sucks everything in magnetically, pulls the atmosphere but still allows wind, keeps non-magnetic beings glued to the earth, sort of. Okay, not going to get into that. Top of the circle to the bottom of the circle, 1.57 ratio to 1. You drop 10 feet every 15.7 that you travel. That's not represented by the physical world we live in. So what did they lie about in that video? Well, the apologetic guys are concerning the assassination of Joseph, the martyrdom. They usually, remember, when using neuro-linguistic programming, you use titles of authority always, whether it's President Biden, President Trump, President Russell M. Nelson, Dr. John Dehlin, you know, does Daniel Peterson have a doctorate? Yeah, I mean, it's Scott Gordon, president of, you know, fair Mormon. Fair, because we're fair. We're fair and balanced like Fox News says they are, right? And what is it? Faithful answers, informed response. Makes us feel good about we're being fair and balanced when we talk about all this, you know, stuff defending the story that Mormonism came from this magic world stuff that manages to change with the all-knowing, unchanging God who can just somehow flippantly switch like a politician, like, I don't know, Donald Trump, Mitt Romney. Come on, I should have named some Democrats here. I'm not bashing one satanically controlled organization over another there, all right? You know, it's hard for me to stay on track. That's why I got notes here. Okay, so Bill Reel was in support of this, I think, or Bill Reel did a podcast recently, not the latest. I think it might have been near Father's Day, and I was trying to look up to see who the young lady was because I wanted to give her proper credit. They talked about, Bill said he has friends who practice witchcraft. They talked about anything from tarot to crystals to seer stones and all those sorts of things. Magic world things. And then, of course, the gal said, there might be some legit things for crystals and so forth, but when these people start talking about their spiritual guides and something else, I'm out. I'm gone, because that's magic world. That's worse than homeopathy and herbal medicine, right? And that's just a continued theme that the magic world stuff that we find is all phony in the version where Disney basically paints that it's just make-believe, but it's fun. But why are all our leaders, whether they're political or in the priestcraft or at the head of other corporations, why are so many, if not all, involved in the occult, in the magic world? Why do we have black magicians running the show? Why? Why do we? Why do we have a pedophilia network that stretches throughout organizations supported by religion, such as the mostly Mormon-supported Boy Scouts of America, until the name got too tarnished, so they dumped them, or the Catholic Church, whose pedophilia is just insane, or at least it's been revealed, maybe more so. It's a larger organization than Mormonism, though they're both extremely rich and both criminally victim blame and subdue information, whether it's Curtin and McConkie law firm, set there right above City Creek Mall. Okay, City Creek Mall, you know what, we bash all that, but at least your tithing dollars, which they lied to you about the use of, went to something where people enjoy a little more than the temple, right? Took a photograph there. Curtin and McConkie is right above the stairwell. Did I say stairwell? All right. Oh my heck, I said that. So my theme is that all this stuff, whether it be what we call religion or what we claim is science, and we claim is different from religion, although they pass that same mental authority over. This is the authorized version of reality. This is the authorized religion, essentially. These are the authorized. Do you teach the approved gospel? Do you teach the authorized gospel? I'm referencing Lucifer in the Mormon temple in the older endowment, which is talking in that's reference to priests being trained in Oxford, etc., and teaching the approved version, which Mormonism isn't the approved version. It's got this Jewish God, really Roman God and Jewish God blended in their theology, as a fair and decent, more believable God, because he doesn't automatically send people to hell forever for not accepting the Roman invented God Jesus while in this life, as the Book of Mormon teaches, right? With its 19th century Christianity in it, when we have, King Laman being told by Ammon that should he perish, now he would surely perish, eternally, because he hadn't accepted Jesus, who hadn't yet been invented, in that timeline supposedly. But Try not to think about that when you're considering the Book of Mormon as an historic document written in Reformed Egyptian, of Israelites being the actual primary or only people in the Americas, despite, despite the Gospel Topics essay on DNA studies and the Book of Mormon, claiming exactly that they were not, that the Book of Mormon doesn't teach that they were the only or primary people, where the Book of Mormon clearly does teach that. I mean, it says we got them from the sea, the Nephites and Lamanites, from the sea north to the sea south, from the sea east to the sea west, covering the entire land, and that the Lord would protect the land from the knowledge of other nations so they would not overrun it, and that the Lord promises Lehi specifically that he would, as long as they remained righteous, preserve the land for their exclusive inheritance, that they might possess it unto themselves. Now, if that's not teaching that they are the only or the primary or the only or primary people, who are the progenitors of the American Indians, according to the visit of the spirit Nephi, who told this to Joseph Smith in his original dissertation on this, or what he published along with, I believe, Oliver Cowdery in the 1835 version of the Times and Seasons. And no, it wasn't Moroni. That got changed by Orson Pratt, it looks like, who was church historian later. So the changing version of rewritten history, Emergent Photon talks about things that are just lined out in the Joseph Smith papers because they're eliminating history. As we do this over time, new speak replaces old speak, and we just don't have the references available for people to do the research which people like I've done, or those whose work I often depend on, and know what they've got in the footnotes, which I endeavor to do honestly rather than dishonestly, like the LDS Church, as we see references such as in the First Vision presentation on LDS.org, now the Church of Jesus Christ.org, etc., where it says, William Law says, William Smith says, my folks, they said Joseph was such an honest boy, we could believe him, and they're referencing the First Vision, except for if you look at the footnotes, the First Vision he's referencing is the one in 1823 with Nephi, who comes to answer his question of whether or not a supreme being even exists. That's pretty contradictory of already having an 1820 vision of God the Father and Jesus Christ in pseudo-Christian belief system, right? It doesn't quite work. You wouldn't be asking if a supreme being even exists in 1823 if you'd had that vision, but hadn't made that one up yet. That's why we had to backdate a few things, right? Just like we backdated the priesthood. When you've got guys like William McClellan, an apostle, never knew he had the priesthood. He's just an apostle, right? Same thing with, Whitmer. Priesthood? What priesthood? Where's this priesthood come from? Well, they backdated things when they got rid of, aspects of the Book of Commandments that didn't support that narrative. Replaced it with a Doctrine and Covenants. And what doctrine was that? It was the doctrine of what the Godhead was, which contradicted what was in the Book of Mormon and the Bible. In other words, that where we go from the point where God the Father and Jesus are one and the same, as we find throughout the Book of Mormon, supported, let's say, in Ether, chapter 3, verse 14, where he says, he's lying to the brother of Jared and telling him he's the first guy he's ever seen him, as he contradicts what you find in Moses 6 and 7, right? Where Enoch is speaking face to face to the Lord, as he's called, at 1,100 years prior, in 3,330, 300 BC, according to that timeline, as opposed to say 2,200 BC, right? He tells them, you've in verses 9 and 15, you're the only dude that's ever had enough faith. That's why you're the only guy that's ever seen me. Except for, what did he do? And we reference this faith, but he moved mountains and rivers and things. Oh, same thing as Enoch was doing, somewhere between there at chapter 6 and 7. of the Book of Moses, which is the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis, canonized that portion by the, LDS Church, versus the rest of it got canonized by Joseph Smith's family in the church that they basically founded or got involved with, replacing the one that Joseph Smith authorized in his letter, stating that his successor would be, what's his name, right? James Jesse Strang, right? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Oh, without a hyphen? Yeah. Nice copy. Who copied who? Who copied who? Somebody copied somebody. Okay, so the Brighamites have got the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with a hyphen and the non-capitalized, day and so forth, right? So, the hyphen there, Latter Day. That's the difference in the church names. He was also assassinated. Smith family followed him. I'm talking William Smith, Joe's brother, Joe's mom, Joe's wife, the patriarch of the church patriarch, the Nauvoo state president, the presiding bishop, Partridge. They all followed Strang, like Joseph Smith said to do. Obviously his family believed that the letter was authentic, but somehow the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Brighamite branch out of Salt Lake, the biggest one, they represent the. We were the main. We were the real thing. Those guys are splinter branches. Who's the real splinter branch? Who knows? Who knows? Origian Photon will agree with what I just said there, I believe, right? She does, like I said, a lot of great historical research that I find to be very interesting. The Brighamite folks were involved in a takeover, and we can see Brigham in line with the Jesuits there, with Jean-Pierre de Smet, meeting him in Iowa, just like we see head of Freemasonry Albert Pike also involved with Jean-Pierre de Smet, because the link between Jesuit and Freemasonry is being revealed to us there. Because all this is about control of the Goyim, and the role played by the Brighamite Church has been huge in the expansion of the money power backed railroads, etc., etc. Okay, does that sound like too much? So Jeremy Renels asked questions in the CES letter. He's demonized by pro-LDS apologetics, which, again, once we find out somebody says something that might be disproven, well, don't believe anything they say. I'm not saying to believe. I'm saying to research it. Okay? So, he provided questions. I provide answers on the Mormon Truth Videos Gospel Topics Hub. It's a website. It's at .weebly.com. Okay? I've got all these different subjects laid out, and there are a number of videos incorporated into the page-by-page topic, one page, one